Later in Genesis chapter 9, we read this: "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, and the fear of you and the dread of you shall be on every beast of the earth and on every bird of the air, on all that move on the earth and on all of the fish of the sea. They are given into your hand. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. I have given you all things, even as the green herbs." And even those who do eat meat will often put restrictions on what kinds of meat we can and can't eat. Misunderstanding our freedom in Jesus Christ, there are sects and there are denominations which forbid things like pork or shellfish or other tasty treats that God has given us. None of this is biblical, and all of it is harmful to the relationship that we enjoy in the freedom which is Jesus Christ. Speaking of nummy foods, Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, "I know and am convinced by the Lord Jesus that there is nothing unclean of itself." Now, we'll talk a little bit more about the food that we can eat later, but remember that the God of creation is the ultimate authority on what is allowed and what is forbidden in the use of his creation. If he allows something, then we interfere with that allowance at our own peril. If we add restrictions that he didn't without obvious and valid reasons, then we are adding to what is not at our prerogative. And likewise, if we detract from his restrictions, then we violate what he alone has the right to mandate. Either way, when we disobey God's law, then we state that we are either more intelligent, or we are more compassionate, or we are simply more important than he is. Point number 2 today is the 5th day, an abundance of life. So here's a question. Have you ever taken the time to watch a bird of prey catch what it's after? Outside of our house, we have these fish hawks, these ospreys that come in and they fly in and they'll catch a little piece of a little fish right out of the bay, and they'll take off, and it's marvelous to watch it happen. Or if you watch a pelican out here, pelicans will dive, and if you see them put their head back up and start swallowing, they got what they were after. And it is very, very, very infrequently that they don't do that. They're marvels of being able to catch these things. My mother sent me a link to an eagle owl recently that was captured on film as it was coming in to get a piece of meat that was attached to a camera. The camera was set at 1,000 frames per second, and this video lasted 59 seconds. So it was a flight of 59,000 frames. It was beautiful to watch. At first, this bird comes in, it swoops in, and it's down below the level of where the target is. And it's just completely ready. It sees its target, and it's just like this. And then as it gets closer, it starts to just gently flap its wings to slow itself down. And when it does, it drops its legs to get a little bit of wind resistance. And then once it is kind of, you can see it's stabilized again, then its legs come back up behind it. And it puts its wings out straight, and it's ready for its final few feet. And as it's coming in, its eyes are never diverting from this target at all in any way. A little bit closer, and the tail feathers fan out, like if you think of the parachute behind the space shuttle or something. So the bird is like this, but the tail feathers are laying down below it. And then within just a couple feet of the target, the bird completely flattens itself out. So it's open, just entirely open like this in front of the target. And at the last second, I mean, it was just within a foot or so of this target, its legs raise up, and they're like this, so its legs are out, its body is flat out like this, and then just before it gets to the food, the claws opened up almost like something on a sci-fi movie. It was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. And as it does it, it starts to flap its wings backwards, and all of these beautiful light feathers are just going off. They're blowing in this direction. So all of this is going on. The bird grabs at the meat, and it's simultaneously ready to fly off, all within a split second. And as this is going on, it is simply dazzling to watch what you would otherwise not be able to see, because it's happening in slow time rather than real time. And this type of precision and this type of beauty that we see comes directly from the mind of God, as he constructed his creatures to dazzle and to amaze us. And we can do this any type of creature if we simply study it. It is amazing to see what God has thought of. On the 5th day, which was Thursday, God did a marvelous work when he ordained the life in the form of the birds and in the form of sea life to flourish here on earth. It says in Genesis, "Then God said, let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the firmament of the heavens. So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded, according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind." Now I want to give you a side note here in case you use the King James Version. That translates this particular verse that I just read in verse 20 a little bit differently. It says there, "And God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and the fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of the heaven." This translation, the King James Version, seems to imply that the sea creatures and the birds were produced out of the waters. However, a different translational choice will allow for a much more probable interpretation. It's what I read earlier. It says, "Then God said, let the waters abound with an abundance of creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the firmament of the heavens." These modern translations clear up any sense that the waters were the source of life. Instead, God is the source of life, and the waters were the medium in which he created the sea life. And then the birds were created by the same great creator, and their domain is the sky above us. Now, this should seem obvious to people that believe in creation, but it's important to separate these two concepts, because for all we know, Darwin, who was raised in a Christian context and probably with the King James Version, could have come to his insane conclusions about the origin of species from that particular verse. So it's good to understand that God is the source of life, and he created out of these things. They did not evolve out of them, in other words.